Does the idea of donor conception make you anxious? Does it make you feel like you have a lump in your throat? Does it make you feel tension in your chest? If you feel any of these feelings or you feel isolated or worried, you're not alone. Using donor conception can be so difficult for so many people, and there's so many questions. And today on our podcast, Becky Kearns from Path to Parent Hub and Defining Mom is going to tell us all about her transition from being a patient to being a parent and developing her own platform to help other people make peace with donor conception and find a path to parenthood that is right for them. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about donor conception, surrogacy, and all the ways the modern family is built. I'm your host. My name is Lisa Schumann. I'm an author, a therapist, a researcher, and I am passionate about helping people have a better path to parenthood and a better parenting experience. And today we're going to talk about both of those things. I'm going to introduce you to a fantastic woman named Becky Kearns. She is a lovely human being and has taken her life's passion or her experience using donor conception and created a wonderful platform in the UK, which is actually similar to one that I will be creating here. So you'll have to stay in touch for that. And it's become this wonderful source of information, education, and support for so many people because so many people still have so much difficulty making peace with donor conception, understanding how to talk to their children, understanding the realities of it. So today I'm going to give you the treasure of listening to Becky. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I think a lot of people are curious, particularly people who are starting on their journey using donor conception, particularly if they're not using their own genetics, about how do they do it? Is it going to be possible for them to bond with a child who's not genetically connected? Am I going to feel comfortable? Am I going to be thinking about this donor all the time? Can I have an open donor or should I not? How do I manage all of these questions? And I feel so alone with it, which is something that, you've shared so much of your story. So can you share with us how you came to terms with it? I think it would be very helpful for our community.
Yeah, of course. And everything you just said there, Lisa, were all the questions and thoughts that went through my head when I first found out that I may need to use a donor to have my children. And I suppose taking you back and doing my story in a nutshell, I was 28 when I was diagnosed with premature ovarian insufficiency, so effectively early menopause, and told that if I wanted to have a child, I would need to go through IVF, and that the chances of that working were very, very low because my egg reserve was so low. So we went through 5 rounds of IVF with my own eggs. I remember it being mentioned at the beginning around egg donation, and I completely shut it down. That was not going to be my story. My husband was also equally thinking, no, I'd never even considered that people donated eggs before I potentially needed them myself. I just had no awareness of it. And they did say because of my age that they were hopeful that if we were able to get a small number of eggs that we would be able to have a baby. And I did get pregnant on the first cycle, but then sadly miscarried at 8 weeks. And then the subsequent cycles after that just didn't work. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in my whole life. I think having the grief, and I didn't realize at the time that I was grieving. I was trying to say to myself, pull yourself together, Becky, just get on with the next one. And I think my way of coping was to think about, okay, what do we do next? What do we do next to achieve our goal? I'd always wanted to be a mum ever since I was a little girl. I'm a real mini-me of my own mum. I'd always imagined having my own little mini-me, and then suddenly this might not be possible. And I suppose for me, over the course of those different cycles, I think I maybe got a little bit closer to the idea of egg donation each time round as I was grieving, maybe coming to terms with, and through that grief accepting that it might not be possible to have a child that shares my genetics. And I suppose a real turning point for me was when I met somebody else who had a little boy through egg donation. And I remember finding her on a NetMums forum online because that was the only place I could find other people who had been through this. And she was amazing because she'd never once said, you have to do this or push me towards it. She just said, look, you'll know if you're ready. And was open to sharing if I had questions. And eventually I met up with her and her little boy, who was about 3 at the time. And I still remember getting in the car afterwards and I burst into tears because it was
Hmm.
just, I think, relief. I had seen their relationship and I saw what was possible. And that kind of opened that door for me into being able to consider egg donation a little bit more. After that fifth cycle that didn't work, we'd already started considering what we were going to do next. We'd actually been on an egg donation waiting list for a long time, just in case. I remember going on that list thinking, I'll never need that. But there was a long wait in the UK at the time, particularly in our local clinic. And at the time when that fifth cycle didn't work, I don't think I was quite as devastated as I thought I would be because I had a plan. And
Hmm.
suddenly I started to, I think, focus on more on what I would be gaining through going down this path and that ability to be a mum and to have all of those experiences as opposed to what I would be losing. And I think that's where the balance shifted for me over the
Hmm.
course of those different treatments. But it wasn't an easy decision. I still had so many different fears when I embarked on egg donation. We actually ended up going abroad for treatment. So we went over to the Czech Republic as we live in the UK. And that was for a number of different reasons. I knew someone else who had been abroad. We wanted to try something different. We'd had so much failure in our own clinic. I was still on the waiting list and nowhere near at the top, and
Wow.
ultimately cost as well. We'd spent thousands in the UK
Yes.
on treatment so far. So we took what I describe as almost like a leap of faith and headed to the Czech Republic. Were matched with a donor. It was fully anonymous, which I would say at the time, I think gave me comfort in the sense that I was
Mm-hmm.
still fearful of the thought of
Mm-hmm.
letting somebody else in and having that person thinking that maybe one day she might replace me in my very real fears about this path. And so, in a way, I think that made it a little bit easier for me to take that step. And we went through the treatment, was matched on characteristics with the donor, didn't have much input into that, found that very
Hmm.
difficult not having that control.
Yes.
But then we were very grateful to have, we had 5 embryos after our donor donated her eggs. And thankfully, it worked first time for us, which I know for many people it doesn't. But I had my daughter Mila, who is now 8. I had her in 2016. And then a year later, we went back to see whether we could try for a sibling. We were told that they had saved our last 4 remaining embryos in 2 pairs. And so it wasn't necessarily what we went out there for to have 2 embryos put back, but circumstance led us to that. And then that led me to have my twin daughters, Eska and Lena, who are now 6. So,
Wow.
yeah, a very long, complicated, emotional story, but I feel so grateful now to have them. And I think it's since I've had them that I've realized there was so much missing from my own experience of trying to get my head around this path and also through pregnancy and as a parent as well, that I've kind of taken it on as my mission to try and change that for people who walk this path in the future.
Well, that's fantastic. That's amazing. So I just want to go back to something that you said earlier, Becky. It sounds like there was like some turning point where you were thinking about this and your husband was also having difficulty accepting it, but you were thinking about it and you felt all these fears and concerns and really like, I can't even think about this. This is too upsetting. And it was all kind of in your own mind. And then you said when you saw this person who had a child and you saw how happy they were and they looked like mother and child just like anybody
Yeah,
else and their life was beautiful, it gave you hope that you could have the same. So I guess
yeah.
I'm wondering, what was that turned the corner for you? Was it about her looking like her son or the love between them, or what was it that made you say, okay, I had certain fears and now they're alleviated because now I see this woman?
I think it was more the relationship and seeing the interaction between the two. And
Hmm.
I remember we met up in a pub in the UK, and he was in the play area, and he kept calling her like, "Mummy, come and help me with this." And there were so many other families around us, and I remember just thinking, these are no different to any other mother and son, mother and daughter around me. And I think I almost felt a bit silly for worrying about that, because when
Mhm.
you see it in reality, you think, oh, actually, yeah, of course, she's the one who has raised him right from being a baby, and she is his mom. And that's the thing. I think sometimes we have all these constructs in our mind around what genetics equals. And when something like one of those foundations is removed, you have to then recalibrate what you think
Mm.
is
Mhm.
right for you, and how you think that would work. And I think one of my fears initially was, would I feel like this child is really mine? Would they feel like I'm really their mum? And would we have the same bond that we would have if we were genetically related? And obviously, I can't say what bond I would have with a genetic child, but I can't imagine having a greater bond than the bond I have with my girls now. And I think I started to realize that relationships are built on so much more than genetics. It's the shared experiences, it's everything you do together. And actually, the even though actually I remember looking at them and looking for the resemblances physically, and I
Mhm.
didn't really see that. She's blonde, he was dark haired. I've seen a picture of his dad, and he definitely resembled his dad. And but that didn't worry me so much, because I saw they were kind of alike in other ways, in just the way they spoke to each other and the mannerisms.
Hmm.
And it was only a short meeting, but it just opened my eyes to so much more. And I think that was part of the reason why I think Esco and Lena were about 6 months old when I decided to start sharing our story, because I almost wanted to show people what I saw on that day, and to show that this is what family like is like. It's just like any other family, but yes, you have
Mm.
some additional complexities, and your story's different, their story's different, but it doesn't mean, I mean, I've used the phrase before that you may not be able to conceive in the way you've always imagined, but you can still parent in the way you've always imagined. And
Mhm.
it's, I think for some people, when there's so much grief around, it's really hard to see past that grief. But time, I think, really, really helps, and connection. And that's the other thing with everything I now create, is to try and enable that connection with others, because a part of that is validation, I think, as well. At the same time, I could speak to friends, I could speak to family, and I could say what I was worried about. And generally, they would try and make me feel better by putting a positive spin on it, or saying, "Oh, yeah,
Right.
but don't worry, of course you'll be mom." But they didn't quite understand
Mhm.
the depths of the fears around it. And yet, speaking to somebody else who truly understands and has been there, I think is so transformative.
Mm.
I think as much as it is having someone to speak to from a professional perspective, I think the peer support and the professional support is really important here together, because, and there's a phrase that Julianne, who we work with on Paths to Parenthood, always uses, which, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think in some ways you do have to see what it's like, when
Mhm.
it is something that is so different to what you've imagined. Like I said, I'd always imagined being a mum and having a child that resembled me, and everything being so simple. Yeah, I had to then reconstruct what that dream was in my mind, to move me towards going through this. But I would say at the time I made that decision, I absolutely wasn't 100% yes, this is the right thing,
Mhm.
but it felt right enough to take that next step.
Which is a really fantastic point. I hope everyone's listening to this. You don't have to go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. You
Mm,
don't have to go from saying, "I could never do this," to "I'm all in," right? You just have to start to get more comfortable with it over time. And everyone, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of people in your community, everyone is different in that way, right? There's no prescription for how someone is going to grieve the loss of their genetic connection. For some people, it's much easier, and for some people, it's much harder, right? And everybody has their own path. And just because it's much harder for you doesn't mean that it won't happen. It just means that it may take some time.
absolutely, yeah. And I hear that from people all the time. I've had some people say, I've heard you talk about how hard it was, and I've not found it hard. Is there something wrong with me? And I've said,
Mm,
no, just everybody's different. But also, I've spoken with people who have come to the decision that it isn't right for them. And I think that's
yes.
equally important when we're talking about this, that people realize that you don't have to go down this path, that it's an option that's there and it's available, but it won't be for everybody. And as you know, Lisa, there'll be so many different cultural aspects, family relationships, and other
Hmm.
reasons why people might decide not to. But I suppose what I want to try and do is shine a light on and open the door for people to say, look, this is what it can be like, and acknowledge that these fears are very, very real. Not dismiss them, but actually try and help you understand them. And that's kind of the work that you do, Lisa, with the podcast, in just giving people that safe space to be able to listen and nod along and say, yeah, that's how I'm feeling right now, rather than feeling really alone in it, which I think is where I was at the time. I felt like I was overreacting, or why am I feeling like this? I just didn't quite understand it until somebody talked about genetic loss as a grief on a podcast almost years later. And I remember breaking
Mm-hmm.
down in tears and going, yes, that was
Mm.
it. That was it. And so I often speak about genetic loss, and that loss will always be there, but so much joy and love has grown around it. But I think that is another important thing to acknowledge, that it doesn't just go away the moment you have a baby. You learn to live with it, and also, like I say, other experiences build around it, and it maybe becomes lesser and lesser dominant in your mind,
Yes.
but there are certain things that can trigger it from time to time at the same time as well.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is so important. And that's why I think it's really important we make this podcast, because even though we talk about donor conception, surrogacy, and fertility treatment, my goal is really to talk about the modern family. And that really means to me being able to actualize what's important to you, whether it's you want to be a single mom, you want to be two dads, you want to, whatever you want to have three people in your relationship. Collaborative parenting is, kind of the new frontier. Lots of single moms have children and then partner later. So everyone needs to appreciate that there's no prescription, right? And what you went through,
Yeah.
Becky, and you're so open about, like you're saying, some people might have a similar experience and some people might have a different experience, but
Yeah.
we have to honor whatever that means to us. And I think it's really hard because I suspect you've probably seen, there's a lot of judgment on social media and the internet about
Yeah.
what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and that every child is going to feel a certain way about being donor conceived, and every parent's going to feel a certain way, and every situation should be this way, and this is the type of donor you should have.
Yeah.
And I think we really cannot make prescriptions for people. Everyone's different. Everyone needs to accept that they have their own path.
Absolutely. And yeah, online can be a really difficult place to be when you hear different perspectives and people share, and you think, oh, should I feel like that? Are they
Hmm.
right? Am I wrong? And there's so much nuance, I think, to this topic. It's not
Hmm.
black and white. There's so many different factors that go into your decision making, also into your parenting and your children's lives as well.
Yes.
No two donor conceived people are going to have the exact same upbringing,
Right.
but there are certain themes, such as talking to them early and often, and things that we can
Hmm.
do to hopefully try and support them in understanding their story. But I suppose one of the things for me that has come up when I've been sharing online, and has been a very difficult topic to talk about because of the strength of feeling around it, is the anonymity aspect.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned earlier, we used a donor from the Czech Republic, and like I said, quite openly and vulnerably at the time. I think at the time that probably helped me make that decision sooner
Hmm.
because of
Yes.
those fears I had. Yet one of the things I do share quite openly now are my reflections on that experience, and having listened to so many donor conceived people talk about their experiences, which I didn't really have access to at the time,
Hmm.
and actually feeling more confident in my role as mum at the same time. I wish, and actually now having these three amazing little human beings in front of me who I'm
Mm.
raising, I really wish that they had that option to find out who the lady was who donated her eggs, who is genetically related to them, to fill in those gaps of curiosity that I hear is so common, and I completely understand is such a common thing. You would want to know more about where you came from. And that is my one regret, that they don't necessarily have that access because we use an anonymous donor, although I wouldn't change what we did because I wouldn't have them. But it's one of those really complex things where if I could change that for them, I would. And there are different ways we can obviously look to support them. But I do try and share those reflections now so that other people who have got that option and are thinking about that option is maybe helping them to do what I didn't do and project forward into kind of
Mhm.
thinking about having those conversations with your children where they might say, well, where is she now and who is she and tell me more about her and can I meet her and has she had any children and tell me more, what does she like, and all of these questions that
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
can't answer. And so having seen the reaction I had when I first shared that I'd used an anonymous donor, it took a bit of a time for me to almost grieve that aspect as well, and realizing what that might mean. And I found it very difficult for a period of time online. But now accepting that I did the best I could with the information I had at the
Yes.
time,
Yes.
and being kind to myself in that, because I went through a long period where I really beat myself up and was reading lots of forums in the middle of the night and
Mm.
almost causing this anxiety. Whereas now I'm focused on that decision was made and it's brought me the most wonderful girls. But what can I do now as a parent to best support them with their story and be open to however they may feel and almost prepare myself and also manage their expectations around it as well in the most open, honest way, so that
Mhm.
hopefully when the time comes, if I mean, I have three girls, so I would expect that at some point one of them is going to want to know a bit more, that I'm ready for that. And I think that's kind of one of the ethos of what I do, is preparing parents so that they're in the best possible position to support their children, because that's
Mhm.
when the children might need additional support and guidance around what their story means for them. And yeah, so I think things lead to different experiences, don't they? And that decision we made back then, I had no idea about the significance of, but I do feel that sharing my experiences allowed me to almost share some of those reflections. And I've heard from so many people who have said, I've actually made a very different decision to what I was going to make, and I've gone with an open ID donor, so that we have got that information based on how you felt afterwards. And so I know that option isn't available for everybody, but I think
Right.
just I do actually think when you've been down the anonymous route, sometimes online you can be told that you've done the wrong thing, you're a bad person, you're a bad parent
Terrible.
because you've
Yeah.
denied them this information, and it can really
Mhm.
affect you. But actually, I think there needs to be more support around those parents that have used an anonymous donor, because
Yes. 100%.
there was factors, yeah, lots of different factors. And I'm sure you've come across that, Lisa, in the work that you've done.
Yes, 100%. I think that everyone, again, needs to chart their own course. And we know that families are different, right? If you feel that for whatever reason, you need to have a child who is of Irish descent because you have 12 relatives who are all Irish and you need to do that, and that one donor happens to not be open. Okay, so they have to figure out how that's going to work for them. Or maybe it's a person of, color, and we don't really have
Yeah.
enough donors of color, right? And so we can't, in my mind, we can't then say to the person, well, you can't be a parent. It's not
No.
fair. And people have to make the decisions that are right for them and their family and do the best they can. And I think it's really, really important, as you're saying, Becky, to try to block out all of that shaming behavior on the internet, because it's so hurtful and destructive. And what we see is that when people feel hurt and shamed and they feel guilty, they are less likely to share information with their children, because then they're
Yeah.
walking on eggshells. Then they're thinking, oh my God, am I doing it right? And they're so nervous about things. And, we see
Yeah.
right now in this country, we have a big problem where people are told by their counselor at the clinic that they need to share early and often if they want their child to understand it, for a variety of reasons we discussed. And parents often don't. 5 years later,
Mm,
we reach out to them and they don't do it. It's really hard. And I think we
yeah.
need to have empathy for the parents and their struggle and not shame them and help support them in this process.
Absolutely. And I think it's also remembering that at the point where often you're making these decisions and you're going down this path, you're in a very, very vulnerable place. And there are so many different things, like you say, that shame is such a big. I really felt a lot of shame around this at the beginning. And it's only through sharing my story and speaking to others that I've been able to process that in a way and realize that no, this isn't something I should be ashamed of. But there's so many different factors that can feed into that. And often one of the biggest things I hear from people is the worry of what other people may think, and how might my
Mm.
family react and friends react, and who should I tell? When should I tell? And should it be the child's story to tell? And all of these different questions and complexities that come with it, that actually, when you're going to a clinic, and because we went abroad, we actually had no counselling at all.
Oh,
We were just
wow.
going through this ourselves. If I'd have stayed in the UK, we would have got the counselling at the point I was matched with a donor. But all that time waiting, there wasn't anything there for me. So
Wow.
it was very much navigating it myself. And I think there are so many people out there who are navigating this on their own, and then reach out to the internet to try and get the information. And often it's very overwhelming in terms of opinions and options
Mm.
and costs and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's a really vulnerable thing to share your story, and to open up and get advice from somebody else. And so this is why I think that the podcast that you're sharing now is so helpful for people, because they can almost get that information whilst they're on their walk, on their way to work. And it's just a very different way, rather than having to go and search for it online like I did a few years ago. Yeah, I think the key thing is everyone is so different, and not everyone will go through this journey in the same way. Like I say, there's so many different complexities. So I always say to people, if you're struggling, then do reach out and find somebody to talk to, because it can be really helpful, I think, for you as you're navigating this path, whether you're making the decision, whether it's right for you, or even going through treatment and choosing a donor, and then through pregnancy, where you're then everything becomes very real, and then
Mm.
into parenting, where right, okay, now I have this little human being to care for and nurture and grow, and then work out how I share their story. It's a lot for I think families to deal with.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And thank you for saying that. I feel the same about your platform, Becky. And I think it's so important for us to help people understand that if they're reaching out to groups that are shaming them or critical
Mm,
or hurtful, then they really need to move away from that, because
yeah,
this is such a hard road to be on, and you need support. And you're going to need support to be there for your children, right? If you're not feeling good and solid as a parent and feeling really great about your decision and feeling like this was the right choice for me, you're always going to feel anxious when you're telling your child their story, or when you're
yeah.
exploring questions that they're going to have as they grow. It's always going to be anxiety ridden for you if you feel like I'm doing something wrong or I'm not good enough. And it's really a shame. And I hope that that does change over time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do think often when people are shamed, they're more likely to run for the tree, run for the hills, and put their fingers in their ear and go, oh, I'm not going to deal with this now, rather than if they're met with validation and understanding and
Yes.
information and support. I think people are more likely to almost kind of face some of those barriers and kind of feelings of shame, as opposed to kind of other ways. If you're told you're not doing something right, or you've done a terrible thing, or if you do that, you're going to damage your child, it's not going to actually
Yeah.
help them do anything differently. I think there's different ways we can support, and I think through the work that we both do, that's what we try and create that space for.
Yes, and everyone is entitled to have the family that they want to have, and we don't
Mm,
know, as you said. I mean, I know my children, all 3 of them have very, very different opinions about their genetic relatives, and, I'm there to support them, but only one of my children really wanted to meet her genetic relatives, and, the other one's not interested. And then, my son, he's still pretty young, and he says, "You're so weird, mom. Like, it's such a weird thing that you wanna do that." So he's still not, in
yeah,
that place where he can kind of, make peace with it. But, kids go through different stages, and we have to be there to support them. But if we're not feeling whole and we're not feeling good about it, how can we be there for our children? And we need to
yeah,
also be able to, if we have a partner, be able to make sure that we're on the same page with our partner.
definitely.
My name is Lisa Schumann. I'm a therapist, a researcher, an author, and I am passionate about helping people find a better journey to parenthood. I created the Center for Family Building to help people understand how to make decisions, not just for the short term, but for a lifetime. We have group counseling, individual counseling, couples counseling, and lots of other services that can help people find the answers that they're looking for. Just take a look at our website so you can see a few of the thousands of people we helped build a better path to parenthood. The decisions you make are too important to leave up to chance. Arm yourself with the right information. Take a look at our website and sign up for a session with one of our therapists, join one of our groups, or access one of our programs, and you will quickly see why our strategies are so effective. Now back to our episode. How did you and your husband get on the same page, Becky?
Yeah, well, I think I said at the beginning that my husband wasn't, he didn't really like the idea at the beginning and thought, oh, no, that's a strange thought of my genetics being mixed with an unknown woman and you're carrying them. And that's the thing, it's such an alien concept at the very beginning. And
Yes.
I think for him as well, he took longer than I did. And I remember thinking to myself, hold on a minute, why are you struggling with this? Because I'm the one here losing my genetics, not
Right.
kind of really appreciating that actually he was also grieving that loss of that imagined child that he thought the two of us would have. And I think actually it was through the person that I met, and I remember telling him about her and just feeding things in, that he started to then kind of think a little bit more. And I mean, he's been quite open. He wrote a blog for me once about how he felt back then and how he feels now as a dad. And he said
Wow.
he very much felt like he had to support me. And I did the lion's share of the research and I was kind of up to date on what we had to do. And at the point where I think he felt okay enough with it, he was like, right, okay, let's do this. I'm with you and I want to support you. But now, I mean, the way he talks about the girls and the way he's so
Mm.
open about it as am I think we both look back now and think, oh, that shouldn't have been as big a decision as it was, but it was, and it was for the right
Mm.
reasons. But I think for him, he had to more get his head around the strangeness of it in his own mind from what he always knew. And again, it was again about that each time I think a cycle failed, he was very positive at first. We'll make this work. It'll happen. It will happen.
Mm.
Again, it's that acceptance and over time. But I do think you can be on different pages at different times. And we used to have we'd spend a Friday evening where we'd walk down to a village pub and it would take about 45 minutes to walk down. And that was our dedicated time for talking about it because I became very obsessive for a period of time. And almost we decided we needed a bit of a line between daily life and then trying to make these decisions. And
Oh.
I'd always look forward to those Friday evenings where we would go for a long walk, we'd discuss and and that's where we started to make more decisions. And he was very open to kind of letting me lead as we were talking to clinics and working things out, but we made the decision together. Yeah, it's a strange one now to look back on because he is so on board with everything, but it did take time. And I do remember at one point thinking when he said, I don't know whether I'll ever be okay with this. And I was desperately trying to get my plan B in my head. And I'll talk about plan B in a second because it sounds like it's a backup plan, but I needed a plan that if this didn't work, how was I going to be a mom? I remember being in the kitchen and he said, I don't think I can ever do this. And I was thinking to myself, well, ooh, what does that mean for us then? And there's all these different things about I want to be a mom and how,
Yeah.
so relationship wise, it can bring up so much. But yeah, I think I just wanted to touch on the plan B comment there and around, I don't want ever our children to feel like they are plan B. They are always what we've always wanted, but we had to take a different route to get to them. But you almost do when you're going through this have to think about what is your next plan and where are
Yes.
your
Of
kind
course.
of red lines and how far are you willing to go and compromises you're willing to make. And that's the thing, I think having to get your head around these different things, it can be so difficult when you've got two different
Mm-hmm.
people in a couple who might be in different places and might have different feelings and strengths of feeling. And yeah, I'm sure you come across this
Yes.
all the time, Lisa, with the work you do.
Yes. And I kind of feel like my children, whether I gave birth to my genetic children or not, that they would be the same people. I just kind of feel
Yeah.
that way. I think some people feel that way. And I just felt like I would have rather been able to connect with them genetically if I had that
Yeah.
opportunity. I think they probably would like to share the same hair color or have this whatever, but we don't. And that's life. We don't always get exactly everything we want in life. And we love each other. And that's the most important thing we're very connected. So I think everybody has to kind of accept that that's okay, right? We don't always
Yeah.
get to the place that we need to get to the way that we want to get to. And that's okay. That doesn't, shed a negative light on our children or on how we feel about our family in any way.
No. Absolutely. And I think that is so important, isn't it? It's realizing that some of those things that you thought were essential are no actually not essential in terms of sharing
Right.
genetics. And I feel like almost I'm not a big believer in things being meant to be, but actually I can't imagine having any other children, and I know them inside out and they know me inside out as well. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
relationship that you have as a parent. And I think there's so much confidence you get through just parenting yourself, and as they
Yes.
grow and they respond to you and you build that relationship. And my eldest Mila once said to me, it was a very strange comment. She said one night, Mummy, I had a dream that I was a ghost and I was floating around and I was looking for the perfect mummy and daddy, and then I found you. And that was,
Wow.
I really took me by surprise. I thought, wow, that's quite spiritual. And I'm not
Yes.
really that spiritual, but just those little things where I think she will make sense of things in her own way as well. And
Mm-hmm.
they understand that mummy's eggs were broken, which is kind of how we started to introduce the concept. And they know that we needed to use eggs from another lady, the donor who donated to us. And we've also, now they're getting a bit older, started to almost talk a bit more about what that means in terms of physical characteristics, resemblances. And I remember my eldest, when I think she was about 6 at the time, said to me, just in the car, just out of nowhere one day, Mummy, I think I know what the donor put in my egg. And I says, "Oh, what do you think?" And she said, "I think she put a bit of blue and a curl in my egg because I've got curly hair and blue eyes."
Oh my
And I
gosh.
felt really emotional. I thought, "Oh, she's getting it." Like, I said, "Yeah,
So
maybe she
sweet.
did." I said, "You might have got your blue eyes from daddy, but I think your curly hair is definitely from our donor because there's no curls on my husband's side of the family." So it's almost like she's starting to join up some of those dots. And there's still, I remember somebody talking to me as an older parent once saying that it's almost like understanding of their story. It's like you're watching a film. So you're watching the film Shrek. An adult will watch that film and understand it in a totally different way to what a child
Mm-hmm.
will. But as they grow, they'll start to understand a bit more. Oh, that actually means that, and that means that. And that, I suppose that's how I envisage the story developing, that you start at this basic level. So it's all they've ever known. It's something you talk about, you've read children's books about, and you maybe sometimes ask them questions about or see if they have any questions. And then as they get older, we've started reading a brilliant book called The Secret Code Inside of You. And it's not about
Mm.
donor conception, but it's about DNA and what does it mean. And it talks about how your DNA determines the color of your eyes, but you decide where to look. And it's got this really lovely balance between kind of
Oh.
that nature aspect, but also the nurture aspect as well. And I've been able, with my eldest, to almost just go through that and like, let's talk about this. And oh, do you know what that means? And it does talk about biological parents in there. And this is where I've then gone, well, it's slightly different for us as our family because you get half of your DNA from daddy, but you get your other half of DNA from the donor. And it's just given us a chance to open up around the fact that I've got green eyes and they've got blue eyes, and just little things where we don't talk about it every day. Sometimes it goes weeks, even months between
Mm.
having these conversations. But when we do, it's a chance for them to understand more and to ask questions and things. And to be honest, at the moment, it just seems to go straight over them, and they just will then want to know when they're having a snack or what's happening
Right.
tomorrow or anything. It's not anything that has seemed to have really stayed on their minds at all. But it's just that little and often, just to keep it kind of usualized for them, that they know their story. If anyone was to say to them, "Oh, how were you made?" they'd be able to tell you. At the same time, and I think this is one of my big fears, it's not a big deal. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to let them know that that is a part of them, their conception journey, but it is not all of
Yes.
them. It's a part of our family, but it's not all of our family. And it's
Right.
for me, perspective has been a big part of this, around actually,
Yes.
if I hold perspective in the terms of our daily life, we're so preoccupied with getting to school,
Right.
when's the packed lunch, when's the after
Mm-hmm.
school club, swimming, all of these things that you're trying to juggle. And the donor conception bit is kind of running along the bottom, and you have those opportunities where it might come up. And I remember once I dropped an egg and Eska said, "Oh, that's like one of your eggs, Mummy, it's broken." And little things where it comes
That's
up
great.
just in daily life. But on the whole, we are just like any other family. We just
Yes.
have a slightly different story, and but so does any family, whether it's relating to how that child was conceived, to traditions, to cultural things. Everybody's got their own differences. And I think it's remembering that and kind of just keeping that perspective that we're there to support our children with their story, but it doesn't have to dominate. It doesn't have to be the only thing. And I think
Right.
I've heard from so many parents where, particularly where they've gone into these online groups, and I was one of them at one point, where I became so obsessive and anxious and lost sleep over it
Mhm.
because I'd heard these awful stories of other people's experiences. And I'm it's so important to learn from the experiences of those who are donor conceived, and to learn what can we do as parents to make it better for this generation. But at the same time, holding that perspective of our family and the nuances within our family and the relationships that we build are all very different, for every family you come across.
Yes, 100%. And I think it speaks to you, Becky, because I think the idea that you have been able to create this foundation for your kids from the beginning, this is just part of who they are, right? This is just part of,
Yeah,
just like they may have curly hair, they may like sports, or they may like music, they're also donor conceived. And not to minimize it, because for some kids it's more important than others, but it is, as I agree with you, one more aspect of their life, one more thing that they just have to kind of grapple with. And that's it. It doesn't have to be this thing that's going to kind of tear apart their life and cause this horrible grief reaction for every child, because every child is different and every child's going to feel differently about it.
absolutely. And I've got three children that might all feel completely differently, and it's all preparing for that. But I think
Hmm.
parenting is all about adapting and worrying. I
Yes.
think being worrying is part of being a parent, and whether you're worrying
Yes.
about how they're going to feel about their conception story versus how they're going to be in their secondary schooling with classmates. There's so many things we worry about. But I
Hmm.
do really believe in having that support network around you when you've had to build your family in a different way. And I just think it's so important for people to be able to get that support, because
Yes.
there will be different times where things come up and things trigger. And I remember when I thought I was absolutely fine with everything now, and that's I've got my family. And it was actually my younger brother who unexpectedly announced pregnancy with his then girlfriend, and I was completely taken by surprise and had never really considered that. As I thought they'd get married first and then that might happen. And I remember at the time wondering why I feel this lump, and why is this, I can feel the grief again. Why is it there?
Mm.
And it was all the complexities of then thinking, oh, so my it's now niece is going to be more genetically related to me than my own children. And what
Hmm.
if she resembles me, and how might that feel? And will my
Right.
parents feel different about her to my daughters? And all completely irrational fears that just became real again. And
Hmm.
it's those little moments where you realize actually that grief is still there, it still sits there. And none of those things have come true. She's come along, and the girls get on so well with her. And my family
Nice.
absolutely adore our girls and couldn't love them anymore. It was the
Oh.
most crazy thing for me to even worry about. But all of these things just go through your head. And I think sometimes, I think what I've had to learn to do is engage the rational side of my brain rather than the emotional side that
Hmm. Hmm.
immediately fears the worst. And sometimes if I go, actually, Becky, no, we've learned over the last few years that genetics don't mean you have a stronger relationship, and we've built these
Right.
relationships. And over time, once the shock had gone, I was then like, oh, yeah, this is amazing. I'm going to be an aunt and I'm going to have all these things. But I shared that example because it was something that really caught me off guard. And I think it's important to remember that you might be a few years down the line and you're fine and you're going along. And then sometimes a pregnancy announcement or something, when you've been through a traumatic journey, can really knock you off your feet. And
Yeah.
so many different things that can come up. But yeah, I just thought it was useful to share that as a kind of
Hmm.
an example of where these things can kind of come back to the surface again at times.
Right. I appreciate that. And I think it's helpful for people to think about what you're saying in not a judgmental way. They shouldn't take that as, well, now I have to worry about what's going to happen when somebody asks me in the supermarket if my child resembles my husband or resembles me, or, somebody asks on
Mm,
the playground some question about. It's really about us, as you're saying, getting used to it ourselves and getting comfortable with it ourselves. And there may be those moments where we go, oh my God, I forgot. Like I was busy packing school lunches. I totally didn't think about, that my child is going to
mm,
have curly hair and I don't. And that hurts still a little bit, but I
yeah,
love my kid. Right. And I think, what I say very often is that, when we go through fertility treatment, we have this pain of not having a genetic link to our child. And then we have this pain about not being a parent, and they're so bonded together. But then when we have our child, they're separated. And then we
yeah.
love our kids, we love being a parent, and we may still have this issue for ourselves, but that belongs to us, and that's for us to grieve. It doesn't take away from how we love our kids or how happy we are to be parents, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right what you say there, Lisa. I think it's like that two things can be true at the same time, and one doesn't need to
Mhm.
take away from the other, does it? It's so true because I know I would not change the girls for the world. I wouldn't change how we came to have them. Even the journey has kind of made me who I am today. But equally, at the same time, I can still wish for a simpler story, or just, I think often I wish for that more for them than for me in a way, because I feel like these things can coexist, that joy, but
Yes.
also that grief that you hold. And it doesn't mean you love them any less. Actually, I think in
It's
so
our
many ways, I
issue.
think I'm more consciously grateful for
Yes.
them and more aware of how I interact with them, and so grateful for the time that we spend together. But that will always be there. And I think for a time I worried that, oh gosh, like, should I still be feeling some of these feelings? And like you said about the resemblance thing, and that's, I think, one of the most common ways it can just pop up at that unexpected time. And it's for us, often it's been the hairdressers with the curly hair, where a new hairdresser is doing their hair and suddenly says, oh, so where do they get the curls from? Which is such an innocent, natural question to ask. And
Right.
it's been a difficult one at times to know, okay, do I overshare here? Because I feel like I've only just met this person. Do they need to know?
Mhm.
But equally, my child's listening in, so I don't want to diminish
Right.
and not talk about it. And it's these in the moment decisions you have to make with different people as to whether or not you share, I think can be quite complex. And I've had times where I have shared, I've said, oh, well, actually, we went through a really difficult journey and to have them, and we had to use an egg donor. So it's funny you should say that. And other times, if I've passed someone in the street, I've just thanks, they've got beautiful hair, haven't they? So it's been a bit of trial and error really for me. But actually, more recently, they've got a new hairdresser, and I did talk about. She actually said, "Your twins are just like Matt, my husband," and she's, "But Mila, your eldest, is just like you." And I found that really interesting because you always expect people to say they're not like you, but
Mhm.
and I felt close enough to sort of say, well, it's really funny you should say that, and kind of gave a very brief overview. I don't go into all the detail, but just say we had a really difficult journey to have them, needed to use an egg donor, and I told her, and her reaction was just of awe and wow, that's incredible. And she said, I've got goosebumps and how
Mm.
amazing. And the girls were there and they saw that and they could see that I was proudly sharing with somebody without shame. But also, I think often we really worry about the reactions, and there are people who won't react in the right way, and you do have to be mindful of who you're talking to when it's your private family story. But actually, we can be surprised sometimes by people's openness and kind of joy at hearing kind of the end, a happy ending to what was a really, really difficult story.
Mhm.
Like I say, again, there's so much nuance when it comes to talking with other people. And I know Haley and I did a podcast about it last month around who do you tell? How do you tell? When do you tell? What message does that give to your children? Is it their story to tell? It is complex, but it is through these sorts of conversations we're having today that hopefully gets people to start thinking and about the different scenarios where it might come up. And I'm by no means an expert. I'm still winging it and I'm navigating my own way through parenting, but it's kind of taking those learnings from different experiences and thinking, oh, could I have done that differently? Or there's times where I've thought, oh, maybe I should have shared, or maybe I shouldn't have shared. And I don't think you ever feel like you've got it 100% right, but it's your story. And I think you decide. I think you did an amazing talk, Lisa, when we did our virtual event around that difference between secrecy and
Mm,
privacy. And that's a really important thing to
thank you.
remember, that you are able to be private about your story, but you also, if you want to be open, then you can do that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's everyone, and the children deserve also to have their voice heard, right? My son, as I said, really doesn't like me talking about his story. And so he just doesn't want to talk about it. And so I'm not going to, somebody says, "Oh, you don't look alike." I'll say, "Oh, how about that?" I just don't get into it around him because he really doesn't want to talk about it publicly just with people that he doesn't feel close to. So,
Yeah.
I think as we get older too, our kids are we'll see them grow and see how they feel about it, and it'll change over time.
Mm. Yeah, you'll get signals from them. And
Mhm.
I the girls know that I work and help people who might need to use a donor. And actually, my eldest said to me the other day, she said, "Why do you need to help people who need to use a donor?" And I was trying to say, well, some people like can find it quite hard, and there's lots of things to think about.
Mhm.
And she was a bit, but why is it so hard? She said, and
Right.
she just couldn't
That's
get
my
her head
life.
around it.
Yeah.
That's because it's so normalized to her, and she's
That's so
trying
funny.
to understand it. So yeah, but they may change over time in terms of how much they want to share, and it is a real delicate balance between it being our story, but also it's their story as well, and that's the point. But I think for me, I want to try and empower them as much as I can, and to role model those conversations, and yeah, hope that they take that on. But they may decide that they want to be more private, and that's always a balance. I think when you put yourself out there and you share something so publicly, and you're doing it for those right
Mhm.
reasons in terms of what you want to do to help people, that there's always that worry at the back of your mind around your children and how they might feel. But I remember when I first started doing this, I said, I've got girls and I don't want them to grow up in a world where people aren't aware of these different things that can happen with regards to fertility and different
So
family
important.
building. And so I've kind of had that at the core of what I've tried to do over the last 5 coming up to 6 years now. So yeah, it's been a journey.
That's great, Becky. I have one other question for you that I think, people often wonder about. How was your pregnancy? Because some people I find feel very connected in their pregnancy. Some people don't. Some people struggle during their pregnancy. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about maybe your experience or other people's experiences that you've seen.
Yeah, and this can really vary. And I think I still remember getting the positive test, and because I'd had a previous loss, I felt very, very anxious. But it was almost that moment of, oh, this is real now. I'm carrying a baby, someone else's genetics. There's no turning back now. This
Mm-hmm.
is this is going to be our story. And I think there was that kind of feeling of that, but also that intent. Oh, I can't believe we've made it over this next hurdle. But I didn't quite believe it was ever going to result in a
Mm,
baby. I don't think until I got further down the line. And I did have quite a few scares in the first 12 weeks, lots of heavy bleeds and went to the hospital and back. And it was a real roller coaster. And I think it was only really after the 20-week scan where things were okay and this settled down that it really started to become real. And I think this was another point where I really felt quite alone. I could talk about pregnancy things with other people in antenatal groups or friends who had been through it, but I did have these worries that I didn't dare voice because I didn't want to seem ungrateful,
mm,
that I worried about whether we would bond and what they might look like, whether they would look really, really different to me. Would they come out looking strikingly different that people would pick up on
mm-hmm.
it straight away? Would I be able to breastfeed? I put so much pressure on myself because I felt like that's something I want my body to do. My body couldn't do the other thing it was supposed to do, but I want to do this. And so I think in a way I kind of went through the pregnancy on the surface where everything I was really happy and really looking forward to meeting them. But underneath, I think I just held these worries and fears. And I know with my birth with Mila, I was induced, had quite a difficult labour, and I actually had to be whisked away into theatre straight afterwards,
Oh,
because I was losing too much blood, and I can't actually remember really having her, and that really upset me. And I remember my husband sent out a message to the families at the time, holding her while I was in theatre, saying, "Oh, mummy's getting cleared up, and just want to introduce you to Mila." And I remember feeling really sad afterwards that I wasn't involved in that bit, and that
yeah.
I felt like I'd almost missed that first few kind of hours of her life. I think that then led into, like I said, around the breastfeeding. I became very obsessed. It was going to make this work. I was on hardly any sleep, and I'd lost a lot of blood. And so I did struggle for the first few months. I remember breaking down with the midwife, and I was so grateful. My mum was really, really supportive and could see that I wasn't quite right. And I look back now, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to my fears, and me velcroing things to, oh, it's because we use donor conception that maybe she's not
Hmm.
latching on as well, or she's crying in the night because maybe there's something to do with me having used a donor. And actually, I look back now, it was
Nothing.
nothing to do with that. I was
No.
like any other new mom, still learning my way. I'd got a baby who had needs, and you're still learning. And it's only now I look back, I can use the rational side of me to go, actually, that was so normal. But because I was almost anticipating things to be difficult, I think I'd made myself feel worse. And then actually, when I had my twins, kind of in 2018, I felt much more confident because I knew the bond that I could build, and I had a C-section which was much more calm, and I was more present, and I was able to have skin to skin with them, and that really helped me as well. But I just wish I could have told myself in that first pregnancy that everything was going to be okay, and that
Hmm.
babies look like babies as well. You worry about what
Right.
will they look strikingly different, and everybody wants to know who they look like. It's not much to say about babies, are there? It's either how are they sleeping or who do they look like, and it's just
Hmm.
trying to almost arm yourself, I think, with some answers. And mine was always, oh yeah, they look so much like their dad, which if I wasn't kind of in the right frame of mind to talk too much, I just could say that. And another brilliant line I've heard from another mom is they look like themselves, which kind of just
Hmm.
throws it right back at someone. It's completely truthful and allows you
Hmm.
to then move on. But I do think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves
Yes.
after a long
Yeah.
fertility journey for to be the perfect parent, for everything to you've it's something
Do
you've
everything
built up
right.
for almost so long that your expectations are there. And I think for me, it took me a bit of time to realize that this is the reality. For it's not just donor conception, this is a reality. If I'd have used my own eggs,
Parenthood.
I'd have been struggling in the middle of the night and with feeding and all of these other things. And
Hmm.
so I think I learned be kind to yourself. I think if you're in this position now, I think find someone to talk to. And it's very normal to have those worries because you are effectively still meeting a little stranger, aren't you? I mean, regardless of whether or not you share
Hmm.
genetics, it's a little stranger you're going to meet. And so that was something I think I've reflected on, and I kind of wish I could have told myself at the time. So if somebody's listening and they're going through this now, hopefully it helps you to feel less
Mm.
alone in those moments. But then other people will just breeze through, and some will find it more difficult. And actually, it might be the point where you're pregnant that some of the things that you might have buried to get yourself through treatment might resurface. And I've heard of people who then
Yes.
will then go and have some counselling, and that will help them kind of process some of what they might have put behind them in the past, but kind of comes back. And I'm sure you see lots of clients
Hmm.
like that, Lisa, who actually the pregnancy does make things a lot more real.
Well, those are wonderful words for us to wind down on, Becky, because I really feel so grateful to have you here. And I think everybody out there will be grateful to hear this as well. It's so important, I think, for everybody to hear this message over and over again that you need to accept yourself and you need to be supportive to yourself. And beating yourself up is not going to help anyone. It's just going to make life harder. So if you can be kind to yourself and just seek information like you would anything else, this is not your fault. This is not something that you created, but it's something that you have to learn to live with. And so we all have to deal with the cards that we were dealt. And I think, Becky, you've done a beautiful job both doing that and also providing a community for other people. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you do to help everyone.
And likewise, Lisa, thank you so much. And thanks for having me today, to be able to share my story. So, yeah, I hope you find it useful if you're listening.
Becky, this is such wonderful information, and I'm so grateful that you're doing everything that you're doing and sharing all you know with the world. It's so wonderful, and I love your platform. I love all of the information that you have out there. Can you tell the audience where to reach you?
Yes, so the main place you will find me sharing what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis is at Defining Mum on Instagram. You can also find out about the work that I do with our membership platform over at Paths to Parent Hub, and you can find out more at www.pathstoparenthub.com.
Great. And you can reach us at familybuilding.net and find our community there as well. And please reach out to both of us on social media or anywhere you like. You really deserve to have a wonderful journey. It's not easy, but you really need to have the support. You're entitled to it. And we're both here for you. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And please subscribe because that's how we keep going. And I'll see you next time. Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.